Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. We're excited to share the release of our latest piece of work, EnergyVision 2030. EnergyVision 2030 builds on the original EnergyVision report we released about 3 years ago. In that report, we looked at how energy efficiency, renewables, grid modernization, and the emerging possibility that electrifying transportation and building heating could all work together to create the clean energy system of the future. In EnergyVision 2030, we've taken those elements, although at this point electrification has evolved really to an emerging consensus at this point, and offered details into their implementation. And when we set out to do this, we had several questions that we wanted to address, both for ourselves and questions we've been asked by policymakers and others in the region. And so just some of those questions are, does the Northeast need more natural gas capacity? Are states on the path to the 80% greenhouse gas reduction mandates that most of them have? Can states increase clean energy and be on a path to 100% renewables? Is the idea of increasing renewable and clean energy viable? And how will the widespread adoption of new electric technologies such as electric vehicles and heat pumps impact the region? So just to give you a little overview, EnergyVision 2030 is the data-driven analysis of where the 7 Northeast states stand in their efforts to expand clean energy to reduce climate pollution and capture benefits for all residents. It addresses what expansion of clean energy market levels are needed to achieve the ambitious reductions in climate pollution by 2030, 45% lower than 1990 levels. It provides concrete quantitative information and goals for states to expand these clean energy markets. It recommends how states can promote expansion of these clean energy markets using market-ready technologies in 4 key areas. And really the key takeaway here is that states can lead the transition to a clean energy future and achieve ambitious targets if they act now to spur further reforms and expand clean energy market development. So just to talk a little bit, there's been tremendous change, I think, in the past few years, and we've seen some rapidly advancing technologies that offer this unprecedented opportunity, I think, when combined. And I'll just talk about some of those now. So the first one is solar PV. The cost of PV has continued to decline rapidly, as most of you probably know. And as a result, the pace of installations has increased dramatically. All you need to do is drive around Massachusetts or Vermont in particular, which is the leading state in the region. And the change is just visually inescapable. There's solar panels just going up everywhere. The next one is offshore wind. The first offshore wind farm in the US opened recently off of Block Island. And it offers tremendous potential for economic growth in this area if we can become the manufacturing and staging hub for offshore wind for the East Coast. While most of the staging for the Block Island project was done locally, most of the manufacturing came from Europe, where they have a much bigger industry. So there's a real opportunity for the Northeast to become a leader here. Heat pumps. So there are now plenty of models that work efficiently even in northern New England, where it's much colder. And this is a proven low emissions heating source that uses electricity much more efficiently than traditional electric resistance heating. And on the transportation side, we have electric vehicles. The number of EV options on the market, whether they're full battery electric or plug-in hybrids, has just increased dramatically in the last few years. There are so many models available now. And more on the horizon, right, with some, 200+ mile range battery car out that's much lower price, and another one scheduled to come out later this year, I believe. And even at today's low gas prices, operating an EV is less expensive than a traditional gas car. And when paired with PV, it can be substantially more so. And a few more of these trends that we're seeing. Onshore wind, it's now the lowest cost new electric generation resource, as reported by Lazard. That's a consulting company that tracks the cost of all electric generation types. Grid modernization. So this is changing our current electric grid, which operates in many respects very much like it did since its inception. And grid modernization is really incorporating new technologies to optimize usage and minimize infrastructure needs. And there are proceedings now underway in many states. Energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is still the cheapest fuel we have, and by avoiding fossil fuel imports, we end up increasing gross state product for over $5 for every dollar invested in energy efficiency. And we've got great examples here of leading states that have dramatically lowered electric consumption, even while their economies boom. So Massachusetts and Rhode Island are now consistently achieving energy efficiency savings year after year that a decade ago would have been thought impossible. And finally, we have energy storage. So we have costs that continue to decline and promising further interesting ways to optimize the grid and integrate more renewables. And again, there are pilots underway around the country with battery storage as well. So these advancing clean technologies really offer us all these opportunities, you know, and they're now available to heat our homes, generate power on site, transport us, build a community-based energy system matched to increasing supplies of wind, solar, and low and non-carbon power sources. And efforts are moving forward in states, but not as a coordinated or ambitious ways as possible. So what we've done so far lays the foundation for increased effort in these areas, I think, and that's what we're going to end up taking a look at through the analysis. So we focused our analysis on how capitalizing these opportunities that are out there can transform the energy system, and we've organized it. You'll see this throughout the report when you look at it in these 4 key areas, just to make it a little easier to process. So electric generation, transportation, buildings, and the electric grid. So the EnergyVision 2030 really provides the data and the pathway for achieving these market goals, and I'm going to walk you through what is the heart of this effort, how we modeled changes to the entire energy system from now until 2030. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of what we modeled and how we did it, and then we'll take a look at the results. We used what's called the LEAP model, so Long Range Energy Alternatives Planning. It's from Stockholm Environmental Institute. It's been used by governments and academics around the world. It's currently being used by Rhode Island and Connecticut on some of their long-range planning. A lot of the data that went into this, the forecast data in particular, is from EIA, the Energy Information Agency, part of the federal DOE, Department of Energy. And they do annual forecasting, and most energy studies in the US use their data in one form or the other. And then we brought some local data in as well from the regional grid operators and a few other sources to try to make our baseline assessment even more accurate. And I think the key thing here is we modeled the entire energy system, not just the electric system. So electricity and all other fuels used throughout the economy. And so I think one of the key things we found as we looked at the historical data and projecting forward without change was that the first generation of climate and energy policies have really been successful. So let's just take a look at that on this chart. The orange line is the historical emissions, and you can see since the early 2000s, you know, they've really started to decline. But as we look forward, they will in fact continue to decline under baseline conditions. But it's not enough to get us to what we established as the 2030 target, which was basically we drew a straight line between now and the 80% by 2050 targets, where we needed to get. And that, of course, is the scientific consensus opinion of what's needed to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. So again, good progress, and we're going to take a look at what we can do to close the gap with some enhanced efforts. But let's take a look at some of those successes that got us to the pretty good place where we are today. So energy efficiency programs, you know, as I said earlier, the region has really been a leader and continues to achieve tremendous savings year after year, while having good economic growth. Renewable energy policies, in particular regional portfolio standards, and renewable portfolio standards that mandate the amount of renewable energy that needs to be in the electric mix. So again, most states have this. New York notably recently increased its up to 50%. And again, these have really helped spur the market for renewables and bring down emissions. And finally, we have the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, RGGI. This was the nation's first cap and trade program. And it includes more than just the 7 states we analyzed here, some others in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic. And emissions have fallen dramatically in the region, while economic growth has outpaced the non-RGGI states. So with enhanced efforts, we feel like New York and New England can build from the foundation of clean energy policies that brought us this far. Spur further development in clean energy markets to realize this new potential. Keep consumer energy dollars invested in state instead of spending them on imported fossil fuels. We don't generate or produce any fossil fuels in this region. So most of that money does not have a significant impact on our economy. Much better to keep it in state. We can close the gap on climate pollution and I think show national leadership, which is more important now than ever, given the changes in Washington. So show, through state action, show leadership that's recognizable nationally for other states. I think it's important to note that this first generation of policies took many years for the results to accumulate. The real impact from them comes from improvements year after year after year, building and then causing significant change, as we saw in those emissions reductions to date. I'm confident we can make the changes needed to spur the new markets to redouble our efforts to get us, better on track to meet the 2030 targets. But we really need to do it soon because these second generation of policies will also take time for the results to accumulate. So let's take a look at the scenario results that we modeled. We used all the data mentioned earlier, and then our changes to key technology areas to create 2 scenarios. So I'll just walk you through the bars here. The first bar is current levels, so that's what they were in 2015, emissions levels. The second one is the baseline for 2030, so that's what would happen if current trends and policies continue. That's where we'd be by 2030. It's really another way of looking at that data we showed in the other chart. And then we have what we called our primary scenario. So this was designed to meet a 45% emissions reduction target, emissions reductions from 1990. And again, as I said before, that would put us sort of exactly on the path to get to that 80% by 2050 reductions. But we also did an accelerated scenario, which demonstrates what's possible for states that are interested in doing more, and we still feel is achievable. And that scenario gets us to a 50% emissions reduction. So what does this 2030 clean energy system look like? And now I'll sort of walk you through some of the results from the modeling. Don't pay attention to the grayed out stuff. We'll walk through it piece by piece. So looking at electric vehicles, this table shows the changes needed for selected key technologies. So I'm not going to go over all of them here. The full report has everything that we modeled, but the bulk of the things that cause the majority of the changes are in this table. And so for electric vehicles, going from current market levels, so how many vehicles on the road are electric of less than 1%, predicted to be 5% in 2030 under current trends, although we should note for the EV one that is based on some fuel economy standards that we think have less confidence will be in place in 2030 than we might have when we started this modeling. To 17% of the vehicles on the road in 2030 under the primary scenario, and 23% under the accelerated scenario. So I think we've seen commitments from manufacturers and forecasts of what the number of new electric vehicles or hybrid plug-in vehicles they're expecting to bring to market in the next few years, and what they expect EVs to be as a percentage of their sales. That these numbers are very achievable and in line with, I think, the changes to the industry thinks are coming as well. Heat pumps.
So we're looking at, again, current market. So these are heat pumps replacing fossil fuels. There are also heat pumps that would replace traditional electric resistance heat, but that's counted under energy efficiency in our modeling because the fuel isn't changing. So the percent of current or of fossil fuel systems that have been replaced with heat pumps is currently less than 1% in the region. We're anticipating that to grow to 3% by 2030 under current conditions, and again, under our policy scenarios, 13 and 16% respectively. Just to put this into perspective, Maine over the past 3 years has converted almost 1% per year, which would mean if they continued at that pace would easily exceed these numbers by 2030. And I think you'll find that for a lot of these results, there are one or two or a couple states that are actually already doing things that have them on track to exceed these levels. And this is about getting more uniform action across states in the Northeast so that as a region we can achieve these levels. So looking at renewables, current levels are 19%. Under 2030, that is expected to grow substantially to 44%. And under our scenarios, 57 and 67% respectively. And we'll take a look at the breakdown here. So wind and solar going from 3% in 2015. If we had the 2016 numbers, that would already have changed, of course, given the rapid growth that's going on. 2030 baseline already grows to 24%. And so we're looking at 35 and 45, again, wind and solar as percentage of electricity generated or consumed in the region. So again, to put this in perspective, Vermont installed PV last year in 2016 at a rate of 80 watts per capita, which is a pace that's above what's needed actually to get to the levels of solar PV that we modeled. But Vermont is by far the leader, outpacing the second place state, Massachusetts, by almost double, or slightly more than double. So hydro under current market levels is about 13%. That's expected to rise in 2030 due to some contracts that are already out for, or potential contracts that are out for bid in the New England region, and also allowable space in in New York's new clean energy standard for hydro as well. And those are expected to change slightly in our scenarios, but that's more about consumption rather than production. So it's just what you're dividing by to get the percent of the mix. And then other renewables remain fairly constant. Looking at energy efficiency, currently the average throughout the region was 1.4% of annual sales. That means that for every kilowatt hour we use, we've saved 1.4% of that instead of using a kilowatt hour. And that's every single year, so that adds up. So after 10 years at this level, you'd be saving 14%. And using only 86, or rather, 86% instead of 100% of actual electricity or energy in general. This is electricity. Under the baseline, that's actually projected to shrink to 1%. And under our scenarios, it's 2.5 and 2.57% annually. And again, to put this in perspective, Massachusetts just achieved over 3% savings last year, and their next 3-year plan puts them close to 3% for the next 3 years. So these are, we have states demonstrating this is completely feasible. It's just a matter of getting all the states to do it. And so the results you've already seen in graphical form here. So we're currently 18% below 1990 levels for emissions. It's projected to go to 30% by 2030, and as you know from our targets for our scenarios, 45 and 50% below 1990 levels. So how do we get there? And so, we think, again, this first generation of policies got us to where we are today, and it's a matter of redoubling our efforts, making them more uniform across states. So we'll talk about some of the specific things we can do in a few areas. So we need to increase the markets for renewables. So expand renewable portfolio standards. A lot of them are sort of hit their caps in the next few years, and so they don't continue to grow. We definitely need change to do that. And expanding and increasing rooftop and community solar. Again, there's a tremendous disparity between the levels of solar that are going on in the 7 northeastern states. It's really striking what some states are doing compared to others. We need to strengthen the markets for electric vehicles through better consumer incentives and also better electric rate design, which really accomplishes two beneficial things. It makes electric vehicles less expensive to operate, which is good, and it also helps optimize the grid by encouraging charging during times when the grid is less strained, and so then it won't be happening at times when it's when the grid is more strained. We need to expand the use of heat pumps. So again, incentive programs help make them more attractive for consumers. Massachusetts recently introduced some incentive programs that are not just giving incentives for the efficiency of the heat pump, for the carbon savings as well. And we think that's a model that can help increase incentives in other states to drive more consumers into adopting heat pumps. We also need education. Right? This is still a new concept. I still get asked to explain what a heat pump does exactly, and it's really difficult. Other than just saying it's just way more efficient than resistance heat, and kind of have to trust us that that's how it works. But they really are, and people are still getting used to them, even though it is really working just like an air conditioner. And in the South, where it's not so cold, they've been used for years and years. There's still a big education process that needs to happen here, not just for consumers, but for contractors and home builders as well. And finally, I think regarding the use of electric heat pumps, states need to end policies that are promoting natural gas pipeline expansion. A lot of these new pipelines that are going in will take 30 years before they even pay back the cost of putting them in. And in 30 years, we simply cannot be using natural gas like we are today. So this period of natural gas as a bridge fuel is really coming to an end, and we've got to be focused on the next thing and not continuing this expansion policies. Next, we need to continue to work on modernizing the grid. And so building on those proceedings that are out there and helping optimize the use of infrastructure we have, as well as encouraging new technology and other things that will help integrate new renewables and with their more variable load, as well as the new electrification of heat pumps and electric vehicles that'll be on the grid. And then finally, reforming utility incentives. We really need regulation that's going to better align the incentives that utilities have and where they make their money to be better aligned with state policy goals. So I think utilities can clearly play a major and positive role in the transformation of the energy grid, and have tons of expertise and know how to keep the lights on. And I think it's just a matter of changing their regulations so that again, the things that they want to do are aligned with the things that the states want to do. So in conclusion, after looking at the analysis, we certainly believe that this clean energy future is within our reach and will benefit all of us. States can achieve deep reductions by building on the foundation they have of good policy. Really just need to redouble their efforts and expand them into the new electrification areas. And really get substantial results. And there are all these ancillary benefits as well. We've got economic benefits, again, of reducing the imported fossil fuels, consumer benefits, in terms of lower costs, grid resiliency in terms of improved reliability. Our hope with EnergyVision 2030 is we can provide the data to show how these clean energy markets can accelerate, give states this clear pathway of where they need to be and what they need to get on track for, and again to lay out some of the policies I think that will help get us there. And so that's our conclusion. I think Krisha's going to tell you now where to find some of these materials, and then we'll take some questions.
Great, thank you, Jamie. So as you can see here, the best place really to view EnergyVision 2030 is on our interactive website, which is at 2030.acadiacenter.org. And there you can really dig into the various aspects of the report and look at the annual data for each of the technologies within the key areas from 2015 to 2030. You can also break that data down by to look at it for New England, New York, or the region as a whole. And then on the website, you can also view and download and print our companion briefs, as well as the summary brochure, which folds out into a large poster with some infographics to help explain and help others enjoy the report visually. The companion briefs cover each of the key areas, and then they are also available for New York and New England separately. And finally, we have a technical appendix, which really digs into the modeling and the methodology for the report. There's also a companion brief for the accelerated scenario that Jamie also mentioned in the presentation. So we hope you will check all of those out. And should you have any questions, you can reach out to Jamie or I think, Jamie, there's a slide with the contact information that we can put up while the questions are starting. Great. All right, and I have a couple questions. Alrighty. First question, could Jamie go into more detail on the strengthen the EV market in quotations that was mentioned on slide 34 and any other notable transportation strategies or policies in the analysis?
Sure. So I'm not sure if that question was asked before or after I described some of the things, but I think the two key things for strengthening markets for electric vehicles are consumer incentives and changing the operating costs, right? So structuring electric rates in ways that encourage charging when costs are lower, and make sure that customers have those rates available to them. And potentially going a little farther in the future, certainly offering rates that pay customers for allowing their batteries to be used for grid storage as well. And again, that would help lower the operating costs as well. And then the other is consumer incentives in one form or another, whether it's rebates or HOV lane access, parking, priority parking. And then there's also the charging infrastructure also. So some states are fairly well along on that, but others are not. And so there's still some need to make sure the charging infrastructure is built out, workplace charging potentially, and other things as well, so that consumers are comfortable and not worried, not concerned that they're going to be stranded, that they'll have a place to charge. So I think it's the combination of those suite of things that can help expand these markets.
Great. And we have more questions here, but if anyone would like to ask their question aloud and has a microphone, you also have the option to raise your hand and we can unmute you. All right, next question is, do you have any recommendations for making local policy changes, particularly in towns with municipal electricity companies?
For towns with municipal electricity, so I think a lot of the recommendations would still hold true for munis as well. And we do have it, it's not part of the 2030, but we have coming out very soon sort of a policy guidebook for communities in general on community energy. But that's still a little ways away from publication. But we'll have that as well, which I think will also contain a lot of recommendations for things that municipalities can do.
Yep, great. Another question, can you speak about the associated costs to implement?
So the LEAP model is not an economic model, and so we could obviously derive fuel costs, which are lower in this scenario, but you have all the technology costs as well, and so it's really, so I should say it's beyond the scope of this analysis, and it really depends on where technology costs go in the future. I think in terms of really for certain where the costs would be. You still there, Krisha?
Oops, I'm so sorry. I didn't unmute myself. Um, Next question is, you mentioned one element under grid modernization, which would be to optimize existing infrastructure. Can you say more about what it would mean to optimize?
Oh, sure. So optimizing the existing infrastructure would mean doing things that avoid um, growing load on the grid, so that you don't have to build new or growing load during peak times, I should say. So, the simplest is energy efficiency programs, right? That cut both demand and cut peak demand. So strong energy efficiency programs, I think we've already seen in the region, are dramatically reducing the amount of new infrastructure that we need, right? When energy efficiency went from not being incorporated into the ISO New England forecast to being incorporated, suddenly a whole bunch of transmission projects that were needed the year before were predicted to be needed in the future and were not needed anymore because the system's just not growing. But then there are, new and I guess not no more important, but maybe more interesting things, technology-based things, like electric vehicles being able to feed the grid with batteries during peak times, things that can do automated load shifting of, home and business devices, sometimes with virtually no knowledge of the consumer and no loss of service. Other things are like having the air conditioning turned up 3 degrees on a hot day, again, to help balance that load on the grid and avoid, having the peak times growing. So I think there's that entire suite of things really, that can help optimize the way we use the grid.
Great. Next question, and then there was a follow-up from the same person. How does your analysis relate to existing legislation in Massachusetts, and what is the position of the analysis on 100% the 100% renewable bill? And then another question was, does your analysis assume 100% by 2050?
So that's a great question. So I can't speak to any of the Massachusetts legislation because I'm not 100% familiar with it. But so certainly our analysis is, I think, consistent with 100% renewable ideas that are out there. We're only looking up to 2030. So I think you obviously don't go from 0 to 100% renewables, or 0 to 80% renewables, whatever it is. But I think the way we've illustrated the pathway, it is clearly on a pathway to even higher levels of renewables in the future. And so I think it's totally consistent. We didn't do 2050, so I don't know what a 2050 scenario would look like, if it would require 100% renewables or not, but I certainly don't think this is a pathway that is at all incompatible. I mean, I guess another way to ask the question is, if we were going to design a pathway to 100% renewables, would it look any different than this? And I'm not sure necessarily that it would.
Great. Okay, next question is there an analysis of reducing greenhouse gas emissions with public transportation, not just EVs?
So included in this analysis, but not, again, highlighted on this, was a decrease over the forecast of vehicle miles traveled. And so that does, and that's included in the results. Again, we didn't go over every single policy change or policy lever that we modeled, but one of those is actually increased public transit and increased walking, biking, and transit, to reduce the growth of vehicle miles traveled in the region. So that is actually part of this analysis.
All right. Next question is, you mentioned that the region doesn't need additional natural gas. How does the data in the report support that?
Yeah, we specifically analyzed peak day gas needs in the winter, and found that they're shrinking. And this is not surprising, because even under our current pathway, right, we had the Massachusetts Attorney General study showing very similar results of peak gas demand decreasing going forward as well, and that's without all these additional policies. And so this is similar to that. But anyway, specifically, yeah, we analyze peak day gas consumption in the winter.
Okay, great. Another question. How much of this is about allocation and targeting of our investments and resources rather than just about spending more? For example, you pointed out some investments that are needed. Are there also some potential investments that we need to avoid to allocate our capital to maximize effectiveness?
That's a great question. And first I'll answer one that wasn't asked, which is this isn't the only way to get there, as you would imagine. The mix of how the policies could end up, obviously we don't know how technology and costs are going to change in the next 10 years. And so you could imagine a scenario where these things themselves are shifted around slightly. But this seems like a reasonable middle ground of where things would go, but they would go plus or minus in either direction for all of them, most likely. Yeah, in terms of investments, so a key one was gas pipeline infrastructure, right? So whether that's distribution pipelines, which are essentially an investment made on behalf of by the gas companies on behalf of the ratepayers, and in some states on behalf of the new customers, that will take 30 years to pay off. And so that is money that could be invested in alternatives. Similarly, again, we don't currently have any schedule, but there have been plenty of proposals for large gas transmission pipelines. That's $4 billion. Some of the estimates that again could be invested elsewhere. Quite frankly, every time, I won't pick Massachusetts because Massachusetts is doing so much energy efficiency, but every time a state like New York, its consumers go pay their electric bill, there has been a decision implicitly made by policymakers that we're not going to go get 3% of our electricity from efficiency. We're going to spend that money on fossil fuel generated electricity. So every state, every electric ratepayer in every state is paying more for electricity and less for efficiency, and more for generation and less for efficiency than Massachusetts. And that is a policy, it may have been made by default, but that's a policy decision of where those dollars are going. And so I think that's maybe the most blatant example of where, a non-decision decision is where the allocation of resources is going.
Great. There was just a quick follow-up to that question. Are there key areas where regional policies and market rules, for example, ISO New England, and state policies can and should get more on the same page?
Yeah, and I think to be fair, I think there is work being done on that, particularly, at both ISO New England and New York ISO, on trying to get better alignment of state policy goals built into the system, rather than trying to, layer the state policy goals on top of the system somehow. So I think that's necessary, but I do want to point out that there are some efforts going on. Good faith efforts, I think, going on to do that as well.
All right, next question is, did the potential for carbon pricing legislation factor into the analysis at all?
It did, we discussed that a lot actually in doing the analysis, and it doesn't, but it really, if you look at it, it's another policy lever for helping develop these markets. So for virtually almost any of them, right? So increased either lowering a RGGI cap, right, for electric, or having carbon pricing in some form on all the other sectors, is just another policy lever to help spur those markets for the clean energy technologies, and they make them look economically. It benefits them economically by actually having the polluting technologies pay for the pollution that they're producing rather than getting that for free like they do today outside of the electric sector.
Great. All right. Another question. How does the Northeast's adoption of clean energy technologies compare with other states and regions in the U.S.? And what does this report say about the rest of the nation?
Well, we didn't go look at all the states in the nation, so it would be hard for me to make comparisons. We did go look for leading policy examples to help show what was achievable in this region. And outside of EVs in California, which are advancing a little better than, definitely, and for a longer period of time than in this region, but and then maybe in PV. But again, there are great examples for almost everything we looked at. There are great examples in the Northeast of states that are being a leader. I mean, Vermont is doing so much PV. It is really unbelievable. Massachusetts is doing so much efficiency. Right? There's no place to go look for a state doing better than that. Maine on heat pumps. There's no place to look, in the northern climates for a state doing more on heat pumps. So the interesting thing we found out was that most of our great examples were actually here in the Northeast. That was sort of the learning experience of how many of our policies have been so successful here in the region. But it tends to be one or two states, and not all the Northeastern states, which is, so we need to do it for all the Northeastern states, and then expand for the electrification as well, which are newer things, obviously.
Awesome. Could I ask everyone, if you're on a phone or a computer, to just mute your phone or microphone? All right, another question. Does implementation of this plan require legislative action by states? Do you foresee that Massachusetts Governor Baker will be amenable?
So I think there are definitely things in here that would require legislation, expanding RPSs, for example. Some could be due through regulation at the PUC level, but some of them would certainly require legislation. And certainly the signs so far in Massachusetts is Governor Baker has been a very good promoter of energy efficiency and clean energy. So I don't have any firsthand knowledge to see why that wouldn't be the case. If it's possible to see further improvements in Massachusetts.
All right. Any other questions? All right. Well, again, if you do have questions or other concerns about the report, please feel free to contact Jamie or me, and our information is still up here at any time. And check out the report at 2030.acadiacenter.org. We want to thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.